A few years ago, Reverend Cheryl and I were at a conference where we were privileged and blessed to hear a presentation by Teresa Fry Brown, an incredible theologian, black woman, distinguished in the field. And Teresa, Dr. Fry Brown, talked about this passage. And what she suggested was that it might be an interesting experiment to try and preach on what it felt like to be the water in this passage. So not to be the people who were walking through the water or the people who were trapped in the water, but the water itself. To think about and to imagine what it felt like to have the hand of God reach into you and change your life. I'm not going to do that this morning, but one of the things that came out of that particular experience with Dr. Fry Brown was that I discovered that I was really, deep down, a black womanist preacher. Now, that might explain why when I'm over in the U.S. Preaching in Niagara Falls, usually at a joint service with a number of Baptist churches, some of them Black Baptist churches, I love to hear from the congregation when someone yells out, "Preach it!" or "Amen, brother." We don't do that in the United Church, but as I thought about this passage and that experience, it really came flooding back, so to speak. You'll notice that in this passage, there's a little bit of forewarning or foretelling of the next part of the story. Moses, in his song, Moses talks about the people of Philistia and the people of Moab and Edom and Canaan as the people of Israel went into the promised land. At the end of the Exodus, and they enter the promised land, Moses is already incorporating that into this story, which gives us a sense of the fact that that this is probably written a little bit after the fact, and so we have some of the history that is recounted in the passage itself. But none of that is what I want to focus on this morning. What I want to focus on this morning is one line right at the end of the passage that Reverend Cheryl just shared with us. The line says, "Then the prophet Miriam." Now remember, Miriam is Moses' sister. It says Aaron's sister, but it also the sister to Moses. Miriam is the one who in the story accompanied the basket down the river, ensured that the basket got into the hands of Pharaoh's daughter, ensured that her mother was the one who was called upon to be the nursemaid. Miriam was there at the very beginning, and now here as the people of Israel are leaving Egypt, Miriam once again makes an appearance, and she is named a prophet. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And then Miriam retells a little bit of the story that Moses has just sung. What strikes me about that is, where did the tambourines come from? Why are there tambourines in this story? And for that, we have to go back to the moment when Israel is preparing to leave the land of Egypt. So Pharaoh has now, we've skipped over quite a bit of the story, but remember, Moses gets there, and we have Moses challenging Pharaoh, and then we have the locusts, and we have the river turning to blood, and we have all of the plagues. And at the end, Pharaoh finally, after the firstborn of the land have been killed, Pharaoh finally relents. And Pharaoh says, "Fine, get out of here, leave, take your people and go." And so all of the people of Israel gather their possessions and they leave. Now I imagine, as I thought about this, I think, we're always faced with the question, if you knew your house was going to burn and you had 2 minutes to take as much of your possessions out of your house, what would you take? And so, we in our 20th, 21st century existence. We would take our photo albums and we would take those meaningful pieces, and also the pieces of wealth, right? The fine jewelry, the artwork, whatever. That's what's happening in the story as the people are preparing to leave Egypt. They have a very short window of time to gather up their possessions and to hit the road. Because, as Reverend Cheryl talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, leadership changes and leadership can be fickle. That becomes part of our story today. But so as the people of Israel are gathering up their possessions, Miriam and some of the other women go and they gather up their tambourines and their musical instruments. And that probably goes unnoticed by those they're traveling with until this moment. When the people of Israel are now on the other side of the Red Sea, they have passed through as if on dry land. They have seen the people who are pursuing them with ill intent, whether to take them back to Egypt and back into slavery, or to just kind of obliterate them so that there is no evidence of Pharaoh's having relented. We don't know what the ultimate goal was, but we do know that the intent was not favorable. So now we have seen, the people of Israel have seen the waters come back over top of their pursuers, and Miriam grabs her tambourine and steps out in the midst of the people of Israel who have just gone through a rather harrowing experience and are facing a future that is unknown. And she begins to play her tambourine and to dance, and the other women join with her. And we find out that there is a purpose for bringing those tambourines and musical instruments. And the purpose is that regardless of where we might be in our lives, there is going to be an opportunity to dance and to celebrate. The people of Israel have just run for their lives. They have been accompanied by God through the day and through the night, a pillar of smoke and a pillar of flame. They know that God is with them throughout the entire experience. And now here they are at a point of transition, and they are at a moment of celebration. Now, when they were on the other side of the lake, or the sea, when they were on the other side of the sea and they saw Pharaoh's armies approaching, and they saw the waters on the other side, and they knew that they weren't going to be able to cross those waters. They could see the writing on the wall. They knew that their days were now numbered. And then miracles happened. And they got to the other side. And Miriam sang and played and danced. Someone once said to me, all things work out in the end. So all things work out for the best in the end. And if we are not witnessing the best, then it's not the end. Because all things will work out in the end. Miriam knew on that day when she was gathering up her possessions, as she saw her mother and her brother and her neighbors gathering up their possessions, placing those packages, those bundles on the backs of their mules and their camels, she knew at that moment that it was not optimum, that this was going to be an unknown future that they were walking into, but that there would be a time at some point when they would once again be able to sing and to dance and to play their instruments. And so she gathered up her tambourine, The other women around her gathered up their musical instruments as well, because they too knew that that day would come. We are in the midst of some crazy times. Reverend Cheryl and I were looking at some notes from earlier, and Reverend Cheryl opened up her calendar book, which she faithfully carries and keeps up to date, and that's very good for me because I don't. But when she opened that calendar book, she saw a page and it said, "What are we going to do if this COVID thing goes on for 10 weeks? What are we going to do if it goes on for 10 weeks? We're going to run out of ideas. We're going to be scrambling." Well, we're at week 20 or something. We have a few more weeks to go. We're going to be almost 30 weeks. We are over half a year in this reality. But on October 4th, we will once again gather in this sanctuary. And because of all of the precautions we're taking, we will be able to sing. We might not be dancing in the aisles, but we will be singing. There will be musical instruments played again, and you will hear it live. Societally, we have protests in the streets. We have people assaulted because of the color of their skin, and we have people assaulted because of the uniform they wear. We have fires raging in communities that have been established for generations and generations. We have the culmination of 400 plus years of slavery and grief and oppression that are now coming to a head. We have communities here in Canada, First Nations communities, that have been calling out, crying out for justice since contact. And those moments, all of those pieces are coming to a point of culmination where we can't see what lies over the horizon. We see the history, that 400, 500 years of history pursuing us, knowing that throughout that pursuit, God has been with us. God has been guiding us with a pillar of smoke in the day and a pillar of fire at night. We are moving towards what Martin Luther King talked about as the end point of that arc of the moral universe. We are moving towards that, and we know that this history is pursuing us. We know that God is accompanying us, and we are coming to a point where we don't know how we're going to get across. We're standing on the shores of the Red Sea, seeing that there is no way across, and that history, that the pursuers are catching up. But we hold our tambourines in our hands. We shuffle our feet a little bit because we are anticipating that moment of dance. We know, because we are people of faith, that those waters are going to part. We are going to walk to the other side. And when we get there, we are going to be that much closer to the promised land. When we get there, we are going to be that much closer to the reality that God dreamed when God first dreamed. We are going to be able to gather together once again. We are going to be able to embrace. We are going to be able to play our instruments and to dance out of joy, sheer joy at knowing that we have arrived at a place of truer justice, of greater compassion, a life lived in fuller communion with our God, the God who promised a world of love and justice. Gospel-centered, whether we understand the message as coming from the gospel or from another source. I am a hopeful person. I'm a hopeful person. And so, I have some maracas in my office. There are tambourines. I love gathering at the market on a Saturday morning, because every once in a while there are people there who are playing guitar with tambourines on their feet to lift us. Important during this time. And important for us as a community of faith, a community that knows and trusts and follows that God. The God of the promise and the God of the dream. Important for us to hold on to that, to hold on to the faith, to share that faith widely and openly and fervently and in a spirit of celebration. Because there are a whole lot of people right now, who are trying to figure out just how we're going to get to the other side. How we are going to move beyond that history to a place of true and lived out justice. So friends, I invite you to continue on that journey with me. And I'm asking you to make sure that your guitars, your banjos, your fiddles, make sure they're all tuned, because there is going to be the day when we get to play them in joyful harmony. Thanks be to God.